The first thing Liam Hayes noticed was the milk was cold enough to sting through the thin cardboard. And the second thing was that he'd forgotten the list again, because he'd told himself he didn't need it, because he told himself a lot of small, tidy things these days that made life feel manageable. Saturday afternoons at Reed and Aldermarket were designed to be manageable. Bright aisle lights that never changed, a soft loop of inoffensive music, the steady percussion of carts rolling over tile seams, and the polite smell of bread pretending it had just left the oven. Liam stood in front of the organic dairy section with a carton of milk in his hand, turning it slightly so the expiration date caught the light. There were other people around him, 2 college kids arguing about oat milk, a dad looking like he'd been sent on a mission he didn't want, an older woman reading every label as if it might lie to her, but all of it felt far away, like he was behind glass. He told himself it was normal to feel that way, that everyone drifted sometimes. He told himself he'd earned this quiet. He'd built loud things for a long time. He had earned a small life with small decisions. Choose a carton. Pay at the register. Go home. Make coffee. Fix the shelf hinge that squeaked. Sit on the couch with a book he'd read before, because rereading felt safe. He was turning the carton back toward the cooler when he heard his wife's voice, and for a second, his whole body went alert as if someone had called his name in a crowded room. Clara's voice was the sound he could find without looking, the sound he could pick out through traffic, through a party, through the blur of a dozen conversations. He knew her laugh the way he knew the shape of his own hands. But this wasn't her laugh, and it wasn't the voice she used with him when she asked if he remembered to buy the specific coffee creamer she liked, or when she came home tired and kicked off her shoes and sighed like she was shedding the whole day at the door. This was her polished voice, her social voice. It was airy and light and a little brittle at the edges, as if it had been trained to float above anything messy. Liam froze, not because he was trying to eavesdrop, not because he wanted to catch her saying something wrong, but because something in her cadence stopped him the way a sudden wrong note stops you mid-step. She was on the other side of the cereal aisle, separated from him by a tall wall of bright boxes and cartoon mascots, and he could have said her name, could have stepped around the end cap, could have turned this into an ordinary moment where she'd roll her eyes at his indecision and toss something into the cart and tell him he was overthinking again. He didn't. He stayed where he was, the milk carton heavy in his hand, and he listened as if his body had decided for him. "I know," Clara was saying, low enough that it should have been swallowed by the store noise, but the syllables cut through anyway. "I know, Amelia. I'm tired. It's exhausting sometimes." The name, Amelia, registered like a small pinprick. Amelia was one of the friends from Clara's previous life, from the world she still orbited even after she'd married Liam and moved into their modest walk-up apartment across town. Liam had met Amelia twice at gatherings where the wine cost too much and the compliments had sharp edges. He could picture her now without trying. Glossy hair, gold bracelets, eyes that never stopped measuring. Liam's hand tightened on the carton. The cold soaked into his palm. Clara continued, and there was a pause where Liam could almost hear her leaning her shoulder into her cart, phone tucked at her ear, her free hand making small dismissive gestures. "No," she said, and the word came out as a sigh that pretended to be kind. "He's a good man. He is. He's kind. He's steady." Liam felt the space between those words, felt the but gathering like weather. He watched the reflection of the refrigerated case lights shimmer on the floor tiles, watched a woman's shoes pass by, watched his own life keep moving in front of him like a conveyor belt. Clara's voice dropped a fraction. "But my God, Amelia, there's no ambition. None. It's like he's content to just exist. And I'm sitting here thinking, is this it? Is this the ceiling?" Liam's throat tightened. He swallowed, and it didn't help. He didn't even know what he'd expected her to say, if he'd expected anything at all. Maybe he'd assumed their private frustration stayed private, that even when she'd been cold lately, when she'd been impatient with the apartment, with the car, with the life, she still held some small protective loyalty around him, around what they were. Clara took a breath that sounded like she was about to laugh, but it wasn't humor. "My parents were right," she said. They told me I'd regret it." There was another pause, longer, and Liam caught the faintest sound of someone's cart being adjusted, wheels squealing, and then Clara said it, clearly, calmly, like a fact she'd gotten tired of hiding. "If I'm being brutally honest, I married down. Liam's whole body went cold, and it was strange, because he was holding milk and surrounded by people, and the world looked exactly the same. No one screamed. No glass shattered. No music stopped. A kid laughed somewhere near the snacks aisle. The grocery store continued being a grocery store. Only Liam changed. It didn't feel like anger at first. Anger would have been hot, loud, obvious. This was quiet. This was a clean cut. A blade so sharp you didn't realize you'd been sliced until the blood came. He stood there, still holding the carton, while his mind tried to make the words harmless by repeating them in different tones. Maybe she'd said it as a joke. Maybe Amelia had baited her. Maybe Clara didn't mean it. But then Clara, still in that same calm cadence, kept talking, and every word hammered the nail deeper. I know how it sounds, she murmured, and there was a tiny laugh. I mean, I married so far down it's embarrassing. It's like, I don't know. I'm practically drilling for oil. Amelia must have said something on the other end, something sympathetic or shocked, because Clara made a soft scoffing sound. Don't, she said. You don't understand. Tonight at dinner, my father's going to ask him about his drafting again, and Liam's going to do that placid smile thing, and I'm going to sit there pretending I'm not screaming. Liam's name in her mouth, his name, spoken like an inconvenience, was what made his vision go slightly sharp at the edges. He could picture the dinner before she even said dinner. The Sterling house was a modern monument to money, white walls and glass, and a lawn that looked like it had been edited. Richard Sterling filled rooms by force of volume. Eleanor Sterling looked like she'd been carved out of restraint. Their home felt more like a place you performed than a place you lived. Liam had sat at their long black table so many times and watched them slice him down with questions disguised as concern. Still at that little firm? Richard would boom. Still drawing lines and boxes? Eleanor would tilt her head and ask if they'd considered something more. Clara would smile too brightly and squeeze Liam's knee under the table as if to warn him not to say the wrong thing. And then she'd go quiet and stare at her plate. Liam had convinced himself it was easier this way. It was easier to be underestimated than to be hunted. It was easier to be the calm one than to argue with people who thought their bank accounts made them right. The experiment, he'd called it to himself. 2 years of ordinary. 2 years of silence. 2 years of waking up without a schedule that depended on investors, city councils, clients with too much ego and not enough taste. 2 years of letting the world forget he existed. He believed it would be peaceful. He'd wanted to know who stayed when the shine was gone. I wanted a partner to conquer the world with, Clara said on the phone, and Liam had to grip the milk harder because his fingers were suddenly weak. Instead I don't know, a man who thinks being fine is the goal. Liam let the carton drop back into the cooler, slowly, gently, like he didn't trust his hands. He stood there empty-handed, his palms still numb with cold. He stared at the rows of cartons and tried to remember how to breathe like a normal person. A normal husband. A normal man buying milk. The thought came, uninvited and razor-bright. She doesn't know. Clara didn't know that the little firm she bragged about tolerating was a company Liam had quietly acquired under a holding name 6 months ago, not because he needed it, but because it gave him a place to tuck certain projects away while he decided what kind of work he wanted next. She didn't know his modest hourly paycheck was a number he'd chosen for appearances, a fiction that kept the world at a safe distance. She didn't know that 2 years ago, he'd signed papers that sold his firm, Hayes Architecture, for a sum large enough to make Richard Sterling's loud confidence look like a rounding error. She didn't know that the quiet man she thought had peaked was still deciding what mountains to build, and that the only reason he wasn't on billboards and magazine covers was because he'd asked not to be. She didn't know any of it because Liam hadn't told her, because he'd wanted the love, not the leverage. And now, standing in a grocery store aisle, he understood something with painful clarity. Secrecy wasn't neutral. Secrecy created a vacuum, and people filled vacuums with whatever story suited them. Clara had filled his silence with disappointment. She had built a whole identity for him out of what she assumed he was. Liam heard her laugh again, soft and tired, as if she were the victim of her own choices. Anyway, she said, I'm heading home. I'll see you tonight. Then her voice dipped, and there was the faintest edge of irritation. Yeah, he's here. Somewhere. He's probably reading labels. She ended the call a moment later, and Liam heard the tiny sound of a phone being dropped into a designer bag, the clack of a cart being nudged forward. He should have moved. He should have stepped out and let her see him so she could watch his face and maybe realize what she'd done. Instead, he turned away, slow and controlled, and walked down the aisle toward the end-cap display of canned soup as if that had been his destination all along. He didn't want her to see him. Not like this. Not here, under fluorescent lights and beside a stack of cereal boxes, with his life splitting cleanly in half. He moved through the store in a fog, grabbing items from memory. Oat milk because the almond milk was always out when you needed it, fresh bread, apples, pasta. His hands worked on autopilot, but his mind was elsewhere, stuck on that one sentence and all the quiet contempt wrapped inside it. I married down. He'd heard people say cruel things in boardrooms, had watched men with expensive watches try to humiliate competitors with polite smiles, had endured the subtle insults of donors who believed money meant they owned your gratitude. He'd never expected it from Clara. Not in that flat, casual way, like she was stating the weather. When he reached the checkout, he paid, thanked the cashier, and carried the bags to the parking garage with a careful steadiness that felt almost ridiculous, like he was trying to keep the groceries from hearing what had happened. Clara was already in the passenger seat of their 10-year-old sedan, face lit by her phone screen, thumb scrolling. She didn't look up when he opened the trunk. "Did you get almond milk?" she asked, the question tossed out like a requirement, not a conversation. "They were out," Liam said. His voice surprised him by sounding normal. "I got oat." "Oh," Clara murmured, and he heard the disappointment, small but sharp, as if the universe had once again failed her. "Fine." He closed the trunk. The click echoed. He got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and the old sedan hummed to life with a sound that was both familiar and, suddenly, humiliating. Liam kept the car because it was reliable and because it didn't attract attention. He'd bought it with Clara years ago when they were younger, when the car felt like freedom. Now he could feel her father's voice in the air, calling it that little tin can, laughing like it was a punchline. The drive home was the quiet kind of tense, the kind where every streetlight flashing across someone's face makes them look like a stranger. Clara tapped at her phone and sighed occasionally, as if the day was exhausting her. Liam watched the city glide past, glass buildings, steel lines, structures he understood down to their bones. He knew which ones were rushed, which ones were beautiful, which ones would have maintenance issues in 5 years. He'd spent his life learning how to build things that lasted. The bitter joke was that he'd failed to build one thing that mattered more than any tower. Their apartment building was a clean, unremarkable 3-story walk-up with a keypad that always took 2 tries. Liam liked it once. He'd liked the big windows and the way the light fell across the hardwood floors in late afternoon. He'd refinished those floors himself, sanding until his arms burned, because he'd wanted the space to feel like theirs. He'd built the bookshelves along the far wall and filled them with books, because he thought a home should hold the things that mattered. Clara used to curl up on the couch and read beside him. Now she used the couch like a waiting room. She got out of the car first, her designer bag tucked under her arm, her hands full, and she said the words without irony as she walked ahead. "My hands are full," she called back. Liam carried the bags up the stairs, for at a time, knuckles whitening. The apartment door stuck slightly, as it always did when the weather changed, and Clara didn't wait to help. She slipped inside and kicked off her heels like she was shedding the whole building. Liam set the groceries on the counter and began putting them away in the precise, methodical way he always did, aligning items, stacking cans, turning labels outward without thinking. It was the kind of small order he could control. Clara drifted through the room, glancing at things with a practiced discontent. The couch that wasn't from a showroom, the kitchen appliances that worked but weren't the newest. She paused at the window and looked down at the street like she was looking at a life she'd been assigned by mistake. "So," she said finally, tone casual but edged. "Dinner at my parents' on Monday. Don't forget." "I won't," Liam said. His hands moved, putting bread in the pantry. Clara watched him for a second longer. Then her phone buzzed, and she turned away, attention already elsewhere. Liam stood at the counter with his back to her, and he let himself feel it. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder than rage. A clarity that made his chest ache. The experiment was over, he realized. He had wanted to believe that if he stripped away the title, the money, the attention, love would remain as something solid and real. He had wanted to be Liam, just Liam, and be enough. What remained, apparently, was a version of him that Clara could tolerate only when she wasn't thinking too hard. He dried his hands on a towel and walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one Clara thought was just his little hobby area. On it sat a worn leather-bound journal with softened edges, the kind you could mistake for a sketchbook from a museum gift shop. Clara had flipped through it once, years ago, and said, "You and your buildings," with a smile that had felt affectionate then. She hadn't touched it since. Liam placed his fingertips on the leather cover, and the simple contact steadied him. Inside that journal were sketches, yes, but not doodles. Early lines, foundational ideas, the first quiet strokes that had become the Meridian Spire. There were also documents folded carefully in the back, transfer papers, asset structures, signatures that made certain things true in the way nothing else could. The Meridian Spire wasn't just a building. It was a statement, a city's new obsession, a masterpiece people argued about over expensive cocktails. It was also his, entirely his, owned through layers of anonymity, so clean no one could trace them back unless he wanted them to. Clara had no idea the thing she craved most was already in their living room, 10 feet from where she now stood scrolling through pictures of someone else's vacation. Liam opened the journal slowly. He didn't look at the sketches. He looked at the papers. He looked at the numbers. He looked at the timelines. He looked at his own name in ink, and he felt something settle inside him like a lock clicking into place. He heard Clara in the bedroom, drawers opening and closing, hangers shifting, the small domestic soundtrack of a life that might already be gone. Liam didn't move. He didn't call out to her. He didn't demand an explanation. He didn't want a fight. A fight would have meant there was still an argument to win. This wasn't about winning. This was about seeing the truth. He closed the journal and slipped it back into the same spot, plain and unremarkable, hidden in plain sight the way he'd hidden himself. He stood there in the quiet and understood something else, too. If he revealed the truth privately, in this small apartment, Clara would cry and apologize, and then, inevitably, her eyes would light up with relief and triumph, because she would have gotten what she wanted without ever having to face what she'd become. Richard and Eleanor would pivot instantly. Their condescension would become praise. They would claim him. They would use him. They would wrap their arms around his success like they'd built it. Liam exhaled slowly. No. The humiliation had lived in private rooms and quiet car rides and whispered phone calls. If there was going to be a correction, it couldn't be whispered. It had to be public. It had to happen where Clara's world lived, under chandeliers and cameras, among the people whose opinions she treated like oxygen. He could already see the shape of it, like an architect seeing a building before the first shovel hits the ground. A moment. A room full of witnesses. The exact kind of silence that makes a crowd lean in. A calm voice telling the truth. Liam's phone buzzed in his pocket with a notification he didn't check. He let it buzz and fade. In the bedroom, Clara laughed softly at something on her screen, and the sound didn't reach him. Liam picked up a pen from the desk and turned it between his fingers, thinking not like a wounded husband now, but like the man he'd been before he made his life small. The man who understood leverage. The man who understood that sometimes you had to strip a structure down to its frame to see whether it was worth rebuilding. He set the pen down, picked up the journal again, and flipped to a page near the back where a simple logo was embossed in the corner. Meridian Spire, subtle and elegant. Liam stared at it until the shape felt like a decision. Then he closed the journal, stood up, and walked into the kitchen as if nothing had changed, because that was the last lie he needed to live for a little while longer. Clara emerged from the bedroom in sweatpants, hair tied back, face bare in a way that used to make him feel like he'd been trusted. "What's for dinner?" she asked. Liam looked at her, really looked, and for a brief second he saw the version of her he'd loved at a university mixer, bright and alive, pulling him out of his quiet corners. Then the image flickered, replaced by the woman in a grocery store aisle saying she'd married down like it was a casual confession. "Whatever you want," Liam said, and his voice was gentle. Clara nodded, satisfied with the lack of friction, and walked past him to the couch. Liam turned to the refrigerator, opened it, and stared at the empty shelf where the almond milk would have been, the small missing thing that somehow felt like a symbol. In 2 days, they would sit at Richard Sterling's table again, and the same script would try to play. In less than 3 weeks, the city would gather at the Meridian Spire for its inaugural gala, the night everyone wanted an invitation to, the night the building would stop being rumor and become reality. Clara didn't know it yet, but she was about to walk into a room designed to show her exactly what she'd failed to see. Liam shut the refrigerator door with a quiet, controlled click, and in that tiny sound, the first act ended. By Monday night, the apartment felt like it was holding its breath, the way it did before any Sterling dinner. And Liam noticed the small rituals Clara performed when she was anxious, the way he noticed stress fractures in concrete. She rearranged the throw pillows twice. She checked her reflection in the dark microwave door. She tried on 3 pairs of earrings and pretended she wasn't trying. The air smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner she used on days she wanted the place to feel more finished, and the old radiator clicked like it was counting down. Liam dressed the same way he always did for her parents' house. Charcoal button-down, dark slacks, shoes he kept polished out of habit. Not because he couldn't do better, but because he'd learned the Sterling family saw better as a costume that proved you belonged, and he'd stopped auditioning years ago. Clara watched him from the bedroom doorway while she fastened a thin gold necklace at her throat, her eyes scanning him like she was editing a photo. "Are you really wearing that shirt?" she asked, and she tried to make it sound like a casual note, like she was helping. "It's clean," Liam said. "It's fine." "It's drab," she replied. "Everything is a statement with them, Liam. Everything." He didn't answer, because there was no answer that wouldn't start the same argument they'd had a dozen times, and he was saving his energy for the larger thing pressing in his chest like a thumb on a bruise. In the car, Clara adjusted the air vent toward her face and scrolled through her phone as if she could scroll away the tension. Liam drove with both hands on the wheel, the old sedan humming under him, the city outside smeared with rain from an earlier shower that hadn't quite dried. For a few blocks, Clara said nothing. Then she exhaled as if she'd decided to try being kind. "Just tonight," she said. "Can you please not do that thing where you smile and say nothing? It makes it worse." Liam glanced at her once, quick, then back to the road. "What would you like me to do?" he asked. "Defend myself," Clara said. "Say you have a plan. Say something." "I always have a plan," Liam said, and the words were true in a way she couldn't imagine. Clara huffed. "You know what I mean." The Sterling house appeared at the end of their drive like it always did, a slab of glass and white stone cut into the dark, lit from within in a way that made it look less like a home and more like a showroom after hours. The lawn was too perfect, and the driveway lights were spaced at exact intervals, and the whole place gave off the quiet, sterile confidence of people who'd never had to wonder if they could afford a mistake. Clara insisted they park a little way down, as usual, away from the entrance, as if hiding the sedan would hide what she feared it represented. They walked up the path together, and Liam felt her arm brush his, not affectionate, just tethering, as if he were luggage she needed to keep from getting lost. Eleanor Sterling opened the door before they could knock, and her smile arrived first, practiced and shallow. She air-kissed Clara, her lips touching nothing, then turned her head toward Liam with the same expression she might use when acknowledging a coat rack. "Liam," she said. "Not hello, just the name." Inside, the house smelled like minimalist flowers and cold money. Everything was sleek. Everything gleamed. Nothing looked like it had ever been used for something as messy as living. Richard Sterling's voice boomed from the living room before Liam saw him. "There they are," Richard shouted, and then he appeared, broad shoulders filling a doorway, tuxedo-level confidence in a casual sweater like the world owed him respect regardless of fabric. He clapped Liam on the shoulder hard enough to make it a display, not a greeting. "The draftsman," he said, grinning, and Liam watched Clara's mouth tighten just slightly, the way it always did when her father said that word. "Still drawing your little lines and boxes." "Something like that," Liam replied, mild, and Richard laughed as if he'd won a round. They moved to the dining room, where the long black table waited, polished to the point of reflection, a table built for 20 that always held 4 like it was staging loneliness as luxury. Eleanor poured wine in measured amounts. Richard launched into a story about some property deal, dropping names the way other people dropped crumbs, like he wanted the world to follow him. Liam listened with the same patient attention he'd given worse men in more expensive rooms. The conversation swung, as it always did, around ambition, around acquisitions, around the correct kind of people. Eleanor mentioned a woman from the club whose daughter had married a tech billionaire, and she said it with that careful brightness that made it an insult without having to say the words. He bought them a summer place in the Hamptons. Eleanor noted, eyes on Clara, not Liam. Can you imagine? Clara smiled too tightly. That's nice for them, she said. Richard snorted. Nice is one word. He cut into his steak with aggressive precision. Security is another. Leverage is another. He turned his attention to Liam with the inevitability of a tide. So, Liam, he said, leaning back, brandy already waiting near his place as if he was preparing for a show. What's the grand plan? You've been at that little firm for what, 2 years now? You ever going to do something with it? Start your own thing? Or is this it? The question wasn't curiosity. It was a challenge, thrown like a glove across the table. Liam felt Clara's gaze flick to him, sharp with hope and fear, like she was begging him to save her from her own embarrassment. He set his fork down calmly. I'm content where I am, Richard, he said. I find the work grounding. Richard barked a laugh. Grounding, he repeated as if the word tasted funny. He looked at Eleanor, then at Clara. You hear that? Your husband's a philosopher. He's not trying to build an empire. He's trying to be grounding. Eleanor tittered, a sound like dry leaves. Clara stared at her plate. Liam watched her do it and felt something shift again, not just heard, but a clean understanding of alignment. She wasn't trapped between them. She was with them. She had chosen their language, their value system, and she was angry at Liam not because he was wrong, but because he wasn't performing. Richard sipped his brandy and leaned forward, pleased with himself. In the real world, Liam, he said, it's kill or be killed. You're a smart enough guy, I'll give you that, but you act like you don't want anything. And a man who doesn't want anything is either lying or he's already lost. Liam met Richard's eyes and held them, steady. Or he knows what he wants, Liam said softly. Richard blinked, thrown off by the calm certainty, then laughed again to cover it. Sure, he said. Sure. Just remember, my daughter deserves a certain kind of life. It was the closest Richard came to saying what Clara had said in the grocery store aisle, and Liam watched Clara flinch as if she'd been hit, and then do nothing, say nothing, let the sentence sit there like a stain. Dinner dragged on. Eleanor asked Clara about her old PR contacts and whether she'd considered going back to something more appropriate. And Richard discussed a new membership at an exclusive club, and Liam stayed polite, impenetrable, the way he'd learned to be when people tried to pry him open for sport. When dessert came, Eleanor served something delicate and expensive, and Richard delivered one more casual jab about drawing boxes. And Clara's face remained a mask of quiet humiliation. Liam didn't rescue her. He couldn't. Because the thing she wanted rescued from wasn't her parents. It was the reflection of herself she saw in them. When they left, Eleanor air-kissed Clara again, then said to Liam, "Drive safe." The words carrying the implication that even their safety was her concern by courtesy, not care. Outside, the air was cold and damp. Clara walked quickly toward the car, as if she could outrun the feeling. The drive home began in silence, so thick it felt like pressure. Streetlights passed over Clara's face, and Liam saw the wet shine at the corners of her eyes. She stared out the window for a long time, jaw clenched. Then she whispered, "Why do you let them do that?" Liam kept his eyes on the road. "Do what?" he asked, though he knew. "Talk to you like that," Clara said, voice cracking with something that sounded like anger but was really fear. "Why don't you ever defend yourself? Why do you just sit there and smile when he calls you a boy?" Liam exhaled slowly. "What would you like me to say?" he asked. "Should I tell him the theoretical stress loads on his unsupported glass staircase? Should I mention his house is an architectural cliché? Would that make you feel better?" "Don't be sarcastic," Clara snapped, and the snap was a relief, the return of familiar friction. "You could at least act like you have ambition. You could tell him you have a plan. Lie, for God's sake." The word landed in the car like a dropped object. Lie. Clara said it with desperation, like it was the obvious solution, like it was the thing any reasonable person would do. Liam repeated it quietly, tasting it. "Lie." "Yes," Clara said. "Lie. So he'll stop. So I don't have to sit there and feel like I'm married to someone they pity." There it was again, in a different costume. The same wound. Liam's hands stayed steady on the wheel, but his voice lowered, not loud, just sharp with control. "My dignity," he said, "is not determined by your father's opinion of my career." Clara turned toward him, angry tears on her cheeks. "You don't get it," she said. "It's not just him. It's everyone. It's the way they look at us. It's the way they look at me. You act like you don't care, like you're above it, but I'm the one sitting there while he laughs. I'm the one who has to live with. She stopped, choking on the rest. Liam glanced at her then, really glanced, and he saw how young she looked in that moment, stripped of her polished voice, reduced to the raw need to be approved of. He could have felt pity. A small part of him did. But the larger part of him, the part that had been sliced open in the grocery store, stayed coldly clear. I know exactly who I am, he said. And I know what I'm capable of. The question is, do you? Clara recoiled as if he'd slapped her. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Liam said, measured, that you're asking me to pretend. You're not asking me to be ambitious. You're asking me to look ambitious. You don't want truth. You want optics. Clara stared at him, breathing hard, then looked away, and the rest of the drive was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It was the kind of quiet that happens after something breaks, and both people hear the crack. Back at the apartment, Clara disappeared into the bedroom without another word. Liam stood in the living room, listening to her move around, drawers opening and shutting with unnecessary force. He walked to the desk, opened the leather journal, and this time he didn't look at the papers as a symbol. He looked at them as a machine. Numbers, dates, structures, the cold, hard architecture of a life Clara didn't know existed. He sat there until the apartment went silent and the bedroom light clicked off, until the city outside fell into its late-night hush, until he could hear his own breathing again. He thought of the grocery store. He thought of Richard's laugh. He thought of Clara's word, lie, and how effortlessly it had come to her. And then he did what he always did when he'd reached the edge of something he couldn't ignore. He made a plan. The next morning Clara was in a better mood, as if her anger had burned itself out overnight and left behind a familiar impatience. She drank coffee at the counter, scrolling through social media, pointing out someone's engagement ring, someone's vacation, someone's penthouse view. Liam made toast. He asked if she wanted jam. She said no without looking up. The day moved on. Work emails came in from the firm he pretended to be employed by. He responded to two, short and bland, letting the fiction breathe. Clara left for her errands in the afternoon and came back with that frantic energy Liam recognized. The energy that always appeared when she felt a door to her world might open a crack. She dropped her bag on the chair and paced the living room, heels clicking a nervous rhythm on the hardwood floor. You are not going to believe this, she said, eyes bright, voice already slipping into that polished excitement. Jessica Featherton called me. Liam looked up from his book, face neutral, but his chest tightened at the name. From your old firm, Clara continued. They're on the board for the children's hospital drive, the big gala this year. She paused dramatically, savoring the moment. It's at the Meridian Spire. The words floated in the air, and Liam felt them land like a weight and a key at the same time. Clara didn't see his reaction. She was too busy living inside her own dream. It's the inaugural event, she said, practically bouncing. The first time anyone gets to see inside. Everyone will be there. Everyone. My father's been trying to get a meeting with the owners for months. He wants to move his corporate headquarters there. Jessica says she can get us 2 tickets. 2. Can you believe it? Liam closed his book slowly. Why would we go? He asked, tone mild, and Clara stopped pacing like he'd spoken a foreign language. Why would we go? She repeated, incredulous. Liam, are you serious? This isn't just a party. This is the event. This is the room. This is everything. There it was, the hunger she couldn't hide. Liam watched it without flinching. It sounds expensive, he said, and he knew exactly what he was doing, deliberately poking the fragile balloon to see how quickly it would pop. Clara's face tightened. Well, yes, she said, irritation creeping in. Of course it's expensive. It's for charity. The tickets are $5,000 each. Liam let that sit. So $10,000, he said. Clara, we don't have $10,000 to spend on a party. Clara's eyes flashed. It's not a party, she snapped. It's an investment. We can't afford that kind of investment, Liam said calmly, and he watched her anxiety transform into anger the way it always did when reality didn't match her desires. Put it on a credit card, Clara said, or my father can help. The idea of Richard helping came with invisible strings thick enough to hang a man, but Clara didn't see strings, she saw ladders. Any other man, Clara said, voice rising, would jump at this. Any other man would understand what this could do. But you just see the cost. You always see the obstacle. You don't have a single ambitious bone in your body. She sank onto the couch and covered her face with her hands, and when she spoke again her voice was thin with desperation. I just want a different life, she said. Is that so wrong? I want to be in those rooms. I want to stop feeling like I'm settling. Liam stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where a couple pushed a stroller and a man walked a dog. Ordinary life moving without drama. He could end the argument with 2 clicks on his laptop. He could show her the accounts, the deeds, the trust documents. He could watch her face change from frustration to shock to relief to a kind of greedy joy she'd insist was love. He could. He didn't. Because that would be too easy, and it would teach nothing. Clara would learn the wrong lesson. That she'd been right to chase status. That she'd just been unlucky. That the universe had finally corrected itself. Richard and Eleanor would flood in with their sudden admiration and claim they'd always believed in him. Liam felt something settle again, the same lock clicking shut. The correction had to happen in the world she worshipped. The reveal had to be witnessed by the people whose opinions Clara treated like oxygen, because only then would she be forced to confront the difference between worth and appearance. He turned from the window and looked at Clara, still on the couch, shoulders trembling. He let his face soften just enough to appear tired, resigned, the way she expected him to be. All right, he said quietly. Clara looked up, mascara threatening, hope flickering through the frustration like sunlight through clouds. What? We'll go, Liam said. You're right. It's an investment. We'll find a way. Clara's face transformed instantly, relief blooming, excitement rushing back, and Liam watched it with a detached calm that scared him more than anger would have. She stood and crossed the room and touched his arm, an affectionate gesture that felt rehearsed even if she didn't know it. Thank you, she breathed. You won't regret this. This is going to change everything for us. Liam held her gaze, his expression unreadable. Yes, he said softly. I think it will. That night, after Clara went to bed with her phone in hand, scrolling through pictures of the Meridian Spire like it was a promised land, Liam sat at the desk and stared at the leather journal until the room felt like it was shrinking around him. He picked up his phone and scrolled past numbers he hadn't called in months, past contacts from a life he'd folded away like a suit he wasn't wearing. He stopped on a name and let his thumb hover for a beat. Marcus Thorne. Marcus was one of the only people on Earth who knew how carefully Liam had hidden his footprint, how deliberately he'd erased himself, how much money and influence sat quietly behind the mask of an ordinary paycheck. Marcus was the kind of man who understood timing, who understood that a reveal was not just information, it was impact. Liam hit call. It rang twice. Liam. Marcus answered, voice crisp, alert, jazz murmuring faintly in the background like he lived in a permanent lounge. I was wondering when you'd surface. You getting tired of your sabbatical? Liam let out a slow breath. Something like that, he said. I need a favor. Marcus's tone sharpened. That's never a small sentence coming from you. Go on. Liam looked toward the bedroom door, listened for any sound, then lowered his voice anyway out of habit. The Children's Hospital Gala, he said. At the Meridian Spire. A pause, then a soft sound like Marcus smiling. Ah, Marcus said. The unveiling. I'm on the host committee. What about it? I'm coming, Liam said. With my wife. But I need to remain off the official list. I want to arrive as a nobody. Marcus exhaled a quiet whistle. You want the full effect. I want truth, Liam said, and he heard how cold it sounded even to himself. Marcus didn't pretend not to understand. All right, Marcus said. I can put you on my personal list. Invisible to everyone else. You'll walk in as Liam Hayes, not as the myth. Liam closed his eyes for a moment. Yes, he said, and I need one more thing. Name it. Liam's gaze drifted to the leather journal. Have my car delivered, he said. The Aston Martin. And have a driver ready for my wife at the end of the night. I want her ride home handled. The pause on Marcus's end was longer this time, and when he spoke his voice had shifted, the humor fading into concern. So it's that kind of night, Marcus said quietly. Liam, are you sure? Liam thought of Clara in the grocery store aisle, calm and careless. He thought of Richard's laugh, of Eleanor's eyes, of the word lie. I've never been more sure of anything, Liam said, and he ended the call before Marcus could talk him out of the architecture of what he'd begun to build. The week leading up to the gala moved like a thin blade sliding under the skin of their normal life. splitting routines cleanly while everything still looked the same from the outside. Clara became a storm of logistics and aspiration. She made lists, then made better lists. She booked a salon appointment with the kind of urgency people usually reserve for medical results. She ordered a dress that arrived in a long white box and sat on the bed like a verdict. Liam watched all of it with a steady, almost clinical calm, the way he watched concrete cure after a pour. You didn't rush it. You didn't poke it. You let the chemistry do what it was going to do. Clara tried on the dress 2 nights before the event, stepping out of the bedroom in a shimmering silver sheath that caught even the apartment's soft, unambitious light and made it feel brighter than it had any right to. For a second, Liam's chest tightened, not with anger, but with the old memory of her, of the way she used to glow without needing an audience. Well, Clara said, turning slightly, checking the fit at her waist, waiting for him to validate the version of herself she was building. Liam looked at her and kept his expression warm enough to be believable. You look beautiful, he said, because it was true. The hard part was that it was true for reasons she wasn't thinking about. She smiled, satisfied, and immediately pivoted into instructions. Okay, she said, voice bright, already in performance mode. So, we need to be smart. When we get there, don't cling to me, but also don't wander. If someone asks what you do, don't say draftsman. Just say architectural design. It sounds better. Smile. And please, Liam, please don't stand there like you're at a dentist's office. I'll do my best, Liam said, and the line landed exactly the way it needed to. Humble, slightly resigned, harmless. Clara nodded like she'd won a small battle. The night of the gala arrived under a bruise-colored sky that threatened rain, the air thick and charged in a way that made the city feel like it was holding its breath too. Clara emerged from the salon looking flawless, hair smoothed into elegant shape, makeup precise, every detail calibrated for a room full of people she wanted to impress. Liam dressed in the bedroom in silence, fastening cufflinks he hadn't touched in 2 years, the tuxedo a classic cut from a life Clara had never seen. When he stepped out, Clara paused. For a beat, she looked surprised, like she'd forgotten he could look like this. Wow, she said, then recovered and tilted her chin. You clean up well. It was meant as a compliment, but it still carried that subtle implication that his default state was something that needed improvement. Liam simply nodded. Ready? He asked. Clara grabbed her clutch like it was a passport and they took a taxi, because Clara didn't want the sedan anywhere near the Meridian Spire. The ride was filled with her nervous chatter, the names and faces she rehearsed as if she was studying for an exam. Jessica said the Vandermeers will be there, she said, eyes wide. And Beatrice Vandermeer herself. And the mayor. And Marcus Thorne. The way she said Marcus's name, like it meant something important, almost made Liam smile. He kept it inside. The Meridian Spire rose out of the city like a piece of black glass caught mid-growth, a twisting tower of steel and dark reflective panels that seemed to pull the skyline around it. Even from the street, it didn't just look expensive. It looked intentional. It looked like someone had built it to make people feel small and lucky at the same time. Clara pressed her hand to the taxi window, breath fogging the glass for a second. Oh my God, she whispered, and Liam heard the reverence in it, the worship, the hunger. Can you believe we're actually here? Liam didn't answer. He watched the entrance fill the windshield, a sweep of stone, tall doors, doormen in crisp uniforms, a line of luxury cars gliding up like a silent parade. Their taxi pulled in, and the doorman opened the door, the air outside cool and expensive with perfume and polished stone. Clara stepped out and adjusted her posture instantly, shoulders back, chin up, as if the building itself demanded it. Liam followed, and the doorman glanced at him briefly, professional, neutral, then offered a polite nod that didn't recognize anything. That was fine. That was the point. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of modern design. A 3-story atrium with a waterfall cascading down polished granite, the sound soft enough to feel calming but constant enough to remind you the building was alive. A string quartet played near the edge of the space, their music smoothing the air. People moved in slow clusters, champagne glasses catching the light, jewelry flashing like signals. Clara's hand tightened around Liam's arm, so hard her fingers pressed through the fabric. Okay, she breathed. Okay, here we go. Richard and Eleanor were already there, of course, positioned near the entrance like they owned the concept of arriving. Richard wore a tuxedo that strained slightly against his ego. Eleanor looked like a sculpture in black silk, her hair perfect, her smile thin. When they spotted Clara, Eleanor's eyes warmed by precisely 2 degrees. "Clara," she said, and offered the air kiss. Richard clapped Clara's shoulder and then looked at Liam's tuxedo with grudging approval. "Well, would you look at that?" Richard boomed. "You managed to find a decent monkey suit." Clara laughed too brightly, trying to turn it into a joke. Richard scanned the room with the intensity of a predator. "What a place," he said, voice dropping into awe he tried to pretend was casual. "The man who built this, genius. Absolute genius. They say he's a recluse. Nobody knows who he is. They call him L.M. Hayes." Clara's eyes widened. "L.M. Hayes," she repeated, as if saying the name might summon him. Richard nodded. "Old money, probably. Or some eccentric. But whoever he is, he's the kind of person you want to know." Eleanor leaned toward Clara. "You must meet Beatrice Vandermeer," she said, voice low and urgent. Then her eyes flicked to Liam. "And try not to let your husband wander off and embarrass you," she added with a smile that could have cut glass. Clara's grip on Liam tightened, then loosened, and she gave him the look, "Stay put. Don't ruin this," before Eleanor guided her into the crowd. Liam was left standing near the edge of the atrium with a champagne flute he hadn't asked for and the soft roar of wealth around him. He watched Clara move, watched her transform as she always did in rooms like this. Her smile became smoother, her laugh became lighter, her eyes became sharper. She was good at this. It wasn't even fake, not exactly. It was the version of herself she believed mattered. Liam drifted a few steps to give her space, the way he'd learned to do at Sterling events. He became a quiet shadow, convenient when needed, invisible when not. It was almost funny how quickly it happened. Clara didn't look back. She didn't check in. She didn't introduce him. She floated from conversation to conversation like she was swimming toward oxygen. A waiter passed, and for a moment his eyes landed on Liam's stillness, on the way Liam stood slightly apart, and the waiter, mistaken by the posture of a man who wasn't performing, held out a tray of empty glasses as if Liam were staff. Liam looked at the tray for a beat, then calmly took it and set it on a nearby table without a word, a tiny gesture of cooperation that cost him nothing. The waiter blinked, murmured a quick apology, and moved on. Liam heard a tiny gasp across the room. Clara had seen it. Her face flashed with pure horror, then she turned away immediately, pretending she hadn't noticed, as if acknowledging it would make it real. Liam felt something inside him loosen, not in defeat, but in release. This was the bottom. This was as low as the performance could take him. Invisible in the building that was the single greatest expression of his mind. And strangely, once he reached the bottom, he wasn't afraid anymore. He walked away from the cluster of people toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting. Outside, headlights cut through streets like veins of light. The skyline held steady. The city didn't care about status. It cared about what stood and what fell. Liam stood with his back to the room, letting the glass cool his palm. He felt a presence beside him before he heard the voice. "Quite a view," Marcus Thorne said, smooth and amused, offering Liam a fresh glass of champagne. Marcus looked sharp in a dark blue tuxedo, the kind of man whose confidence came from competence, not volume. Liam took the glass. "I designed it to feel like the city is yours for a second," Liam said. Marcus's eyes flicked to him with quiet admiration. "You always did have a flair for controlled arrogance," Marcus murmured. "The board is getting restless," he added, leaning in slightly. "They're all here dying to meet the mysterious L.M. Hayes. The mayor's here. Press 2. Richard Sterling has been trying to corner anyone with a pulse to find out who you are." Liam's mouth curved faintly. "He's persistent," Liam said. Marcus's gaze shifted across the room. "Your wife," he said quietly. Liam followed his look. Clara stood with Richard and Eleanor near a cluster of influential people, laughing at something Richard said, her body angled toward a woman in diamonds, as if she could absorb importance by proximity. Clara's eyes kept scanning, searching for the next rung. Her gaze passed right over Liam again, not even registering him. "The introduction needs to happen soon," Marcus said. "If we delay too long, people start to feel like they're being toyed with." Liam nodded. "We won't delay," he said. I just need the room to be exactly ready. Marcus studied Liam's face, then softened his voice. Liam, he said, you don't have to turn this into a war. Liam didn't look away from Clara. It's not a war, he replied. It's a mirror. Marcus exhaled. All right, he said. The chairman's going on stage in a few minutes. When he cues your name, it's your moment. Liam reached into his inner pocket and felt the envelope he'd brought, crisp and white with the subtle embossed logo of the Meridian Spire. It wasn't necessary for the plan. It was symbolism, a final piece of staging he'd designed for himself. He held it for a second, then slid it back. The quartet faded. The room's murmur softened as if a hand had turned down the volume. A distinguished man stepped onto the low stage and took the podium. He spoke about the children's hospital, about funding new wings and equipment, about generosity and community. People nodded and sipped champagne, polite in their attention, waiting for what they really came for. Liam watched them with a calm that almost felt detached, as if he were observing a structural test. The chairman smiled. And now, he said, voice resonating through the atrium, I want to extend a special thank you to our host this evening. As you know, the Meridian Spire is the talk of the city, a masterpiece of design and engineering. It is my honor to introduce, for the first time publicly, the visionary architect and owner of this incredible building, a man who until now has preferred to remain behind the scenes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. L.M. Hayes. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind over water. Heads turned toward the wings of the stage. Clara rose onto her toes, eyes bright with anticipation, her whole body leaning toward the idea of power. Richard's posture straightened. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. Liam did not move toward the stage. Instead, he stepped away from the window and began to walk, calm and deliberate, straight through the center of the crowd. At first, people barely noticed. Then someone's eyes caught his movement and turned, confused. Someone else followed that gaze, then another. The ripple changed direction. It moved toward him. Liam's footsteps were soft on the stone floor, but in the hush they sounded like punctuation. He passed Clara. He saw her face change in real time. Confusion first, then panic, then a silent pleading that was almost physical. What are you doing? Her eyes screamed. Go back. Sit down. Don't do this. Eleanor's hand flew to her chest in a gesture of theatrical horror. Richard's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. Liam didn't slow. He walked past them, past the people who'd ignored him, past the people who'd measured him, toward the stage where the chairman was now staring, bewildered, as if the script had changed and no one told him. Liam climbed the steps and took the podium with the quiet authority of a man who belonged there, because he did. The room held its breath. Part for the silence that followed was the kind Liam had always loved in architecture. The moment after the last beam is set, before the first footstep tests it, when everything hangs between theory and reality. He stood behind the podium and looked out at the crowd, at the mosaic of faces shifting through confusion into recognition. The microphone was live. He didn't rush. He let the room feel the weight of the moment it had been waiting for without knowing it. His gaze found Clara, because it was always going to find Clara. She was frozen, champagne flute trembling in her hand, her silver dress suddenly looking less like armor and more like a costume she couldn't breathe in. Liam leaned slightly toward the microphone. Good evening, he said, voice calm, clear, amplified perfectly through the atrium's acoustics. My name is Liam Hayes. The name landed and detonated in layers. A few people blinked as if they'd misheard. A few frowned, searching memory. Then the ripple hit the ones who knew him, the ones who'd seen him at Sterling dinners, the ones who'd dismissed him as background. A sharp inhale moved through the room. Liam continued, his tone steady, almost gentle. Some of you know me simply as Liam Hayes. But the chairman was correct. For the last few years, I have preferred to go by a different name in my professional life. He paused, eyes lifting toward Richard Sterling, who was now staring as if the laws of physics had been rewritten. L.M. Hayes, Liam said. The L is for Liam. The M is for Michael, my middle name. It's a pleasure to finally welcome you all to my building. The collective gasp was not subtle. It was a physical sound, a wave. The room shifted. Whispers erupted, then died as quickly as they started, as if people were afraid to miss what came next. Cameras lifted. Phone screens glowed. Liam raised one hand slightly, not a command exactly, but a signal that he expected attention. The room quieted again, obedient, because power does that. "I know this may come as a surprise," he said, and he let the understatement do its work. "For the last 2 years, I have been living a quiet life. I sold my previous firm, Hayes Architecture. Some of you may recognize the name. And I wanted to know what life felt like without the title, without the prestige. I wanted to see what remained when the world stopped applauding." He didn't say the word experiment, but it sat between his sentences like a shadow. His eyes returned to Clara, and though he spoke to the room, the message narrowed toward her. "It has been instructive," Liam said. He could feel Marcus standing off to the side, watchful, ready to step in if the moment tipped too far. But Liam didn't need help. He had designed this. He shifted slightly, the movement subtle, and his voice warmed as if he were pivoting into a broader speech. "My father-in-law, Richard Sterling," he said, and a murmur ran through the crowd again at the phrase father-in-law, "often likes to say a man's worth is in what he builds." Liam smiled, small and controlled. "He appreciates ambition. He once asked me, at his dinner table, if my plan was to draw my little lines in boxes forever." A few people laughed nervously, not sure if they were allowed. Liam lifted his hand again, the laughter fading. "Well, Richard," Liam said, turning his head so the sentence aimed like an arrow, "I suppose you were right. I have been drawing lines in boxes." He swept one arm outward, encompassing the waterfall, the soaring atrium, the city's elites standing beneath his work like guests in his mind. "This one is my biggest one yet," he said softly. "I hope it meets with your approval." Richard looked like someone had punched him in the stomach without touching him. His face drained, his bravado collapsing in real time. Eleanor's mouth parted, her mask slipping. Then she forced it back into place, but the damage was done. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears so quickly it looked like her body had been waiting for permission to fall apart. Liam let the silence sit for a beat longer than was comfortable, because discomfort was part of the lesson. Then, with a calm that felt almost cruel in its restraint, he said, "My wife has been worried that she married down." And the room reacted like a single organism, a collective flinch, a hush so deep you could hear the waterfall's steady pull. Clara's breath hitched, and Liam watched her face as if he were watching a crack spread across glass. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't shout her words back at her. He simply named the fear, and naming it in public did the rest. "I hope tonight puts those fears to rest," Liam said. And if anyone expected triumph in his tone, they didn't get it. What they got was a kind of sad clarity. "My only ambition for a very long time," he continued, "was to build a life with her. But a structure is only as strong as its foundation. And the foundation of our life, I have come to realize, was built on a misunderstanding." Clara's tears spilled. Her mascara began to betray her. Her hands trembled, and still she couldn't move. Liam took a slow breath and then did something that made the moment hit even harder. He stepped back from the private edge of it and returned to the public purpose of the night. "But that is a private matter," he said, voice turning warmer, more open, as if he were offering the room relief. "We are here tonight for something more important." He spoke about the children's hospital, about what the funds would do, about building not for ego but for community. He spoke like the leader he was, articulate and composed, the kind of man the room wanted to admire because admiration felt safer than discomfort. Marcus stepped forward at the right moment and handed a file to the chairman and the mayor's face shifted into impressed recognition that would make headlines. Cameras flashed like lightning. When Liam finished, the silence broke into applause, thunderous, rising, tidal, the kind of applause that wasn't just approval, it was alignment. The room had decided what story it was part of now, and it wanted to be on the right side of it. Liam stepped down from the podium, and immediately people swarmed him. The mayor, a senator, business leaders, donors, the woman in diamonds, Beatrice Vandermeer, whose eyes gleamed with opportunistic interest. Liam shook hands, smiled politely, accepted praise with the calm of someone who'd heard it before. In the crush, Clara tried to move toward him. She stumbled, her silver dress catching slightly at her heel, her movements suddenly clumsy, human. "Liam," she called, voice thin, breaking. "Liam, please." Heads turned. People watched. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Some stared with that quiet hunger people have for public pain. Clara pushed through two clusters, desperate, and Liam heard her. Of course he heard her, but he didn't turn. Marcus intercepted her before she reached him, stepping into her path with a gentleness that was also a wall. He spoke to her in a low voice Liam couldn't hear, his expression firm. Clara's shoulders collapsed. She looked past Marcus at Liam, eyes pleading for a glance, for anything that said she still existed to him. Liam gave her nothing. He turned slightly to address the mayor, nodding at something the man said, his face composed, engaged, unreadable. It was, in its quiet way, the most brutal thing he'd ever done, because it removed the last illusion that this was a misunderstanding they could smooth over with a private conversation. Clara stood there for a moment longer, then turned, humiliated, and moved toward the entrance like someone walking out of a burning building. Behind her, the Sterling family imploded. Richard grabbed Eleanor's arm with angry urgency and pulled her toward the exit, his face a mask of gray fury and panic. They didn't look back at Clara. They didn't look back at anyone. They moved like disgraced courtiers fleeing a palace coup. Clara remained alone for a beat in the grand atrium, suddenly a solitary island of shame, while the crowd gave her a wide berth. The same people who'd air-kissed her earlier now looked through her, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. She wasn't Clara Sterling the social climber anymore. She was the woman who didn't know who her husband was. An hour later, after the frenzy softened into smaller conversations and the press had secured their angles, Liam excused himself with practiced ease. He didn't go toward the main entrance. He walked toward a concealed bank of private elevators tucked behind dark wood paneling, the kind of entrance you built for people who needed to disappear. Marcus met him there. "Your car is waiting in the private garage," Marcus said, voice low. "And a driver has taken your wife home." Liam nodded. "Thank you," he said. Marcus hesitated. "You really didn't give her anything," he observed, not judgmental, just acknowledging. Liam stared at the closed elevator doors as if he could see through them. "If I give her something," Liam said quietly, "she'll grab it with the same hands that called me an anchor." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I get it," he said. "Still," he added softly, "just make sure you're not building a victory you can't live in." Liam didn't answer. He took the private stairs down to the garage instead, wanting the cold air, the emptiness, the honest quiet of concrete. The Aston Martin waited under clean overhead lights like a piece of midnight sculpted into a promise. Deep blue paint, sleek lines, the kind of car that didn't apologize for existing. Liam slid into the driver's seat and the smell of rich leather filled his lungs, grounding him in a reality he'd kept locked away. He started the engine. It roared alive with a deep, throaty sound that felt like power waking up. He drove out of the Meridian Spire and into the city night, not fast, not reckless, just deliberate, letting the streets roll beneath him like a familiar language. He didn't drive to the penthouse. Not yet. He drove to the walk-up apartment where he'd lived his lie, because endings needed punctuation, and this was his private one. He parked the Aston Martin directly in front of the building under a single buzzing street lamp, and it looked absurd there, like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong neighborhood. Liam got out and stood beside it, hands in his pockets, staring up at the window of their apartment. The lights were on. Clara was inside. He could imagine the scene without seeing it. Her shoes kicked off too hard, her hands shaking as she wiped mascara, her mind replaying the moment the room gasped, the moment her parents abandoned her, the moment Liam didn't turn around. He stood there for 5 minutes, a silent sentinel beside proof of who he really was, letting the image burn itself into the night. Then he got back in the car and drove away, the engine's growl fading down the street, leaving behind only the lingering symbol of what Clara had lost. Part 5. The penthouse at the top of the Meridian Spire was everything people imagined when they said the word luxury, and it still felt empty when Liam walked into it alone. He'd designed it as a sanctuary, clean lines, natural materials, glass walls that held the city like a living painting. The silence up there was different from the silence in the apartment. The apartment's quiet had been small, domestic, filled with the possibility of someone entering the room. The penthouse's quiet was vast. It was a quiet that reminded you no one was coming unless you invited them. Liam moved through the space in his tuxedo, loosened his tie, set his cufflinks on a smooth stone counter, and stared out at the city until his reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. The next days blurred into meetings and calls, controlled chaos dressed in expensive language. People congratulated him, pitched him, flattered him, asked for partnerships, asked for access. The story of L.M. Hayes revealing himself at his own gala spread quickly, because it wasn't just business news. It was gossip with a moral hook, the kind people repeated because it made them feel like the world had rules again. Liam handled it with quiet competence, giving the press just enough to feed the narrative but not enough to own him. He didn't attend the parties that followed. He didn't accept the invitations to exclusive clubs. He returned to work, to building, to the only thing that ever felt honest. Through Marcus, he heard small reports about the fallout. Richard Sterling's business began facing unexpected regulatory hurdles. Clients became suddenly cautious. Contracts evaporated. People who once laughed at Richard's jokes now found reasons to be elsewhere. Richard had built his empire on bluster and connections, and when the connections decided he was a liability, the bluster didn't hold. Eleanor withdrew from society like a machine powering down. They sold the house within months, quietly, the way proud people do when they can't bear witnesses. Liam didn't celebrate it. There was no satisfaction in watching a structure collapse when you could see all the weak beams that caused it. The more complicated question was Clara. For days he heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no angry outburst, no apology. The silence was so complete it almost felt like a strategy, and Liam didn't know which was worse, that she was plotting or that she was simply broken. A week after the gala, a courier arrived at the Meridian Spire with a large manila envelope. No return address. Liam signed for it without expression and took it to the kitchen island. He stood there for a full minute before opening it, as if he were waiting for his hands to be steady enough to handle what might be inside. When he finally slid a finger under the flap, the first thing that fell out was a key. Their apartment key. The second was a letter, handwritten on plain white paper, the lines slightly uneven as if the writer's hand had trembled. Liam's chest tightened, not with hope, but with something like dread. He unfolded it and read. Clara didn't start with excuses. She didn't start with how she felt misunderstood or pressured or stressed. She started with the only thing that mattered. She named what she had done. She wrote that she had spent the week inside their apartment surrounded by the life she'd held in contempt, seeing the bookshelves he built, the floors he sanded, remembering how happy he'd been while doing it. She wrote that she'd thought he was happy because he was simple, and now she realized he'd been happy because he was free. She wrote that sorry was a word for spilling coffee, not for destroying a marriage. She wrote that the shame she felt wasn't the shame of public embarrassment, but something deeper, cellular, the shame of realizing she had looked at a good man and seen nothing. She wrote that she hated the person she'd become, that she didn't want to be her anymore. And then, in the line that made Liam's throat tighten, she wrote she wasn't asking to be taken back, that she had no right to ask for anything. She thanked him not for the money she hadn't known existed, but for the lesson. She said she was leaving the apartment, staying with her sister in another state, trying to figure out who she was without her parents' money or her husband's name, trying to build something real for the first time. She ended by saying the woman he married was gone, and she hoped one day to become a woman worthy of the man she had been married to. It was signed simply, Clara. Liam read the letter 3 times, slowly, as if the words might change if he stared hard enough. The anger that had sat in his chest like a cold stone didn't disappear, but it loosened, shifted, making room for something more complicated. Growth, he thought. Real growth. The kind that hurt. He walked to the window and looked down at the city from a height that should have made him feel victorious. Instead, he felt hollow, because he'd gotten what he wanted, truth in public, correction in the exact room where Clara had wanted to shine, and still the cost tasted like ash. He had never truly wanted to destroy her. He had wanted to wake her up. And now he had. Brutally. And the question was what you did after you woke someone from a dream by slapping them. Liam didn't call Clara. Not that day. He wasn't ready to hear her voice. He wasn't ready to let hope sneak back in wearing the costume of forgiveness. Instead, he called a small independent design-build firm in Oregon that focused on sustainable community projects, the kind of work that mattered without needing an audience. When the owner answered, sounding surprised to hear his name, Liam said, "I'm looking for a project that's grounding." And he meant it, not as a performance, but as a need. Months passed. The seasons turned. The story of L.M. Hayes became a city fable. Liam's days filled with meetings and design reviews and quiet decisions. He stayed away from glittering rooms, partly because he didn't need them and partly because he couldn't stand how easily people pivoted when they smelled power. He invested in the organ firm, mentored from afar, funneled money into community work without putting his name on plaques. He built, because building was the one place he could be honest. One crisp autumn afternoon, Liam walked through a public park near the Meridian Spire with a new sketchbook in his hand, not the old leather journal that had become a symbol of deception, but a plain one that smelled like clean paper. The air was cool enough to feel sharp in his lungs. Leaves turned amber and red overhead, and sunlight filtered through them in soft patches. Liam sat on a bench and began sketching an oak tree, the way its branches held themselves, the way the light struck one side and left the other in shadow. He was halfway through a line when he felt, rather than saw, someone sit on the far end of the bench. He didn't look up at first. He kept drawing, because he'd learned not to react to proximity in a city. Then he heard a small inhale, like someone gathering courage, and something in his body recognized it before his mind did. Liam lifted his gaze. Clara sat a few feet away, a book in her hands, but she wasn't reading. She was looking at him. She looked different, softer, not in a glamorous way, but in a human way. Her hair was simpler. Her clothes were tasteful but understated. Her face was bare, and the brittle high-energy polish that used to cling to her like perfume was gone. She looked tired but steady. Liam's heart beat once, heavy. Clara's eyes widened slightly, not with fear, not with shame, but with quiet recognition, as if she'd been expecting this moment but hadn't known where it would arrive. "Liam," she said, voice soft. "Hello, Clara," he replied. They sat in silence for a beat that held years inside it. Liam gestured toward the book. "You're back in the city," he said. Clara nodded. "My sister's wedding is next month," she explained. "I'm here to help for a few weeks." She hesitated, then added, as if the detail mattered to her more than she wanted it to. "I'm working." Liam didn't interrupt. Clara looked down at her hands, then up again, eyes clear. "At a nonprofit," she said. "We help build community gardens in low-income neighborhoods." She gave a small, self-aware smile. "It's grounding." The word hung between them like a bridge and a wound. Liam's mouth curved slightly, not amused, not mocking, just acknowledging the irony. "That sounds wonderful," he said, and he meant it. Clara's shoulders lowered as if she'd been bracing for judgment and didn't find it. Liam noticed her nails weren't perfectly manicured anymore. There was a faint smudge of dirt under one. Proof, small and undeniable, that she'd been using her hands for something real. They sat again in a quiet that wasn't tense, just careful. Around them, the park moved in ordinary life. Parents pushing strollers, teenagers laughing, an old couple walking slowly. The kind of life Clara had once looked at as if it were a punishment. "The letter you wrote," Liam began, then stopped, because he didn't know how to say everything he wanted to say without making it either too harsh or too hopeful. Clara's gaze dropped to the book in her lap. "I meant every word," she said quietly. "I didn't write it to make you feel anything. I wrote it because I needed to tell the truth for once." Liam nodded, fingers tightening slightly around his sketchbook. "And now," he asked gently, "what do you want?" Clara's eyes lifted, direct. "I want to be someone I can respect," she said. "Not someone who borrows worth from a last name or a building or a room." She swallowed. "I had to lose everything to realize my parents' standard was worthless." Liam listened, and the strange thing was he believed her, not because he wanted to, but because the words came without performance. They came with a simplicity that felt earned. Liam looked out at the park, at the leaves, at the light. "I set out to teach a lesson," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And I think I learned one too." Clara's lips pressed together, as if she didn't want to ask, but had to. "Did it make you feel better?" she whispered. Liam considered the question honestly. For a moment, he admitted. And then it felt empty. Clara nodded slowly, like she understood the emptiness because she'd lived in it for years without naming it. Liam closed his sketchbook gently and stood. Clara watched him, her posture still, attentive, but she didn't reach for him, didn't ask for anything. That restraint mattered more than any apology. "I'm glad you're back, Clara," Liam said, and it surprised him how true it was. Clara's smile this time was small and real, reaching her eyes. "Me too," she said. Liam hesitated, then added, careful, "Maybe I'll see you around the park again." It wasn't an invitation wrapped in pressure. It was a question with room to breathe. Clara nodded once. Maybe you will, she replied. Liam walked away without looking back, because looking back would have been too much, too soon. The story wasn't over. It wasn't a dramatic reunion or a neat ending you could sell as a fantasy. It was something quieter, harder, more patient. If anything was going to be rebuilt, it would be built the way real things were built, slowly, carefully, with respect for what had collapsed and why, on a foundation that didn't depend on applause.